Okay, great. So I'm going to start now. So welcome to the Roundtable event, everyone. So in addition to our fantastic artists in residence, we've also got three special guest panelists with us. We've got Jen Southern, who's an artist, senior lecturer in fine art and new media, and associate director of the Centre for Mobilities Research at Lancaster University. Her work is a hybrid of art practice and mobilities research and has been exhibited internationally for 25 years. Lisa Thomas from Northumbria University is an assistant professor. She's also an associate director of the Psychology and Communication Technology Research Group. She's also been a senior researcher on three EPSRC projects that have been closely linked to digital identities. So we're really excited to have you here, Lisa. And we've got Linda Spurdle as well, head of digital at Birmingham Museums Trust. Very lucky to have you back. You also did one of the artist studio visits. So leading on strategy, digital engagement and ICT across Birmingham Museums Trust. She has spearheaded Birmingham's open access policy and made thousands of out-of-copyright images free without restrictions. So the way that we thought we were going to structure this session was around sort of notional framing of past, present and future of digital identities. And we want to spend probably about 10 minutes each talking about each of the sort of the works. And then we'll have a little bit of time maybe at the end for some sort of quick fire questions from the audience and sort of the panelists as well. So I want to sort of start us by talking about past, so broadly speaking, sort of past, like how we might be remembered in these systems, the idea of sort of new kinds of archives, which obviously links very closely to Anshal's work. You know, questions around consent, violence in the data capture and sort of display, and what good digital archives might entail. And of course, we've got Linda here with us from Birmingham Museums. Has obviously done a lot of thinking about archives. So, Linda, I'm wondering if I can invite you to sort of share some comments or questions or thoughts on Anshal's work today and sort of kick off the conversation.
Yeah, okay, I will. I'm happy to do that. It's funny because it wasn't that long I saw, obviously we were on the panel event with Anshul, and I was still shocked. I was still shocked by the images that he was sharing. And I think that some people might think, well, it's in the past, you know, it's awful, but it was then. But one of the things that really struck me today was that so many more people can see and use those images today than in the past. They probably have a much bigger influence, strangely now, than in the past. Would you say that's true, Anshul? What do you think the ripple effect of these images now in the present?
Yes, I totally agree with this fact that because these images are online, it does have that aspect of free access to everyone. Even I would not be able to see those images had it not been digitized. And so, again, as I said, that technology has that good aspect also. But with that thing, we should also be more conscious about, again, the double-edged sword which technology is, that we should be more conscious and more ethical about how we display certain images, how these images float around in the cyberspace, and how, again, we look at it more ethically as viewers. One of my favorite essays is an essay called Death in the Browser Tab by Teju Cole, in which he talks about the privilege which we all have in our society of consuming someone's moment of death or someone's moment of private grief at the click of our mouse. And so this problem is something which I also think about while looking at images from Palestine, right? I am a person who has the privilege of looking at those images on my Instagram, and I can easily scroll down and look at a cute cat picture. So this notion of how images lose their seriousness, this was something written by Walter Benjamin also in his essay, The Work of Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction. But this problem has been completely amplified in the cyberspace. And I totally feel very guilty sometimes, the kinds of horrendous images which I have the privilege of looking at. And I can just shut down my browser tab, or I can open another browser tab and look at a cute cat picture. So for my work is all about context and how certain images lose their seriousness, and also how once an image is out there, it's out there. And this is something which we all should also think about our own images, the identities that we are crafting and posting online with our own willfulness, or someone else taking the image. Once that image is out there, you have no control over that. Anyone can do anything with that. An AI model could be trained on it, or someone could make a meme out of it. And so this is something I think a lot about, that in the cyberspace, we should be very conscious of how an image should circulate in a more ethical way, especially certain images which have gravitas.
I was thinking also of the commercial side of it, and it's quite shocking to see all of the things that you can buy, but that New York Public Library won't be the only case of where that's happening. And I was wondering whether you thought there's something about it moving to be a photograph to a digital asset, something that's just thought of as a commodity, that has this effect that people don't think that the image, the context matters anymore because it just is a saleable item.
Yeah, this is something I also talked about in my studio visit. That I have talked about this issue with the New York Public Library archive team. Also, they have not done anything. I recently applied for a fellowship there. Sadly, was rejected with this project, and they have still not changed the website after looking at my application. Also, so I think a lot about these are images which are not just data points, or these are not just codes on a screen. These are images which meant something way more to the people in those photos and to their families. I mean, I also showed you images from Nazi atrocities in Poland. I personally would be very pissed had I been a Holocaust survivor and I found out that my grandfather's image is even being rendered in this way. And I also not think anyone those images from the archive. But even the act of rendering these images on the browser tab in this form is wrong. An institution, cultural institution, should set a benchmark of what should be done correctly, and they are not doing it still. And that's why I'm trying to think of more ways how I could protest them to actually make them change, because nothing has worked till now.
So this is the final question I was going to ask you, is just like, how can we be doing this better in institutions? How can we be doing a better job of both? I don't expect just you to answer this, but it's the beginning of thinking about it. How can we do a better question of both presenting, keeping these things safe, given the context? I mean, one of the things I was thinking about was like, who should we be consulting with, and also what context should we be giving? Because one of the things that I thought about really about the works that you were sharing is there is really no context. You can't really understand them. So yeah, just any initial thoughts on that?
True, yeah. So one example, as I shared in my performance also, I think Yale University's archive is a good example of how you should be thinking more deeply about these images. The book which I'm dealing with is also on the archives of Smithsonian Institution, and they have provided proper context. They also have digitized the descriptive letterpress of each image, which contains the description of the tribes which have been documented, which New York Public Library does not have. So I think this is more proper way of showing these images. And again, my work should never be mistaken for something like cancel culture. I am totally up for showing these images as historical objects. These are very important documents which everyone should have free access to. But yeah, as institutions, I think we all need to be thinking more consciously of how we are better custodians, how we are better preservers of these cultural artifacts in some ways. And again, someone's moment of extreme pain.
I do think it's really valuable information, and I think museums and other institutions have also been guilty, possibly of working in the past with communities, perhaps on co-curation, looking at decolonization, but that not affecting the record. And this is what concerns me, that there might be an exhibition and I get it claimed, but the records that we have might not actually change, and the information that we give, therefore doesn't change. So yeah, it's been really, really useful for me to hear from you, Anshul, I've got to say.
Thank you.
Yeah, let's jump in there and just say, yeah, it's been super interesting. And I think the thing that makes me think about is that, in creating these sort of large archives of digital identity data as well. We're creating the same issues. Like, we still need to be thinking about how we're good custodians of that data, and it's a very interesting sort of connection there. So, thank you so much for so many interesting sort of insights and suggestions and sort of provocations. I'm going to sort of thank you for that, and I'm going to sort of move on to the next bit. So thank you both. So we're going to move to the sort of the present now, and this is sort of thinking about. So one of the things that me and Kim have been thinking about a lot in the sort of wider project relates to sort of digital identities, sort of for managing life transitions. The idea of sort of using digital identities to sort of discover self in some sense, and so this sort of made me. For me, this speaks very closely to what Jeannie's work was about. This idea of sort of past, present, and future, and maybe like almost like predicted fragments of possible futures sort of coalescing in the present, and what those moments might enable. We're obviously really lucky to have sort of Lisa here today, who's got experience of working on these sorts of ideas around sort of digital identities in sort of different but probably related ways. So I'd love to sort of welcome Lisa to comment or perhaps lead some questions with Jeannie around this work.
Hi, I'm just making sure my microphone's on. Good stuff. I really loved your short film, Jeannie, and I was sat watching it thinking how it reminded me of the idea of our disparate selves from different contexts kind of coming together and meeting each other, and almost a bit like a crash. And I suppose it's in the literature, there's this idea of context collapse, where you can't keep all of your different sort of communities separate. You've eventually on places like social media or even in the real world, you get different groups of people that eventually they sort of overlap, and sometimes there's a jarring of that. And so that's what your film reminded me of, where you can't always keep these different parts of yourself separate, and platforms online have made that even more possible. So I just thought that was really, really interesting. I don't know if you wanted to chip in or.
No, thank you so much for saying that, Lisa. I really love that interpretation of it. And I think when I'm trained as a visual artist, but then I also afterwards went to film school, fell in love with filmmaking. And when I'm making a film, a traditional film, a narrative film, I really want all my viewers to go on the same emotional journey that the protagonist is going on. But when I'm making a piece of art, I really want it to point at a myriad of meaning and a myriad of metaphors. So that interpretation is not what I was thinking about when I made it, but I love your interpretation, and I find it equally valid to what I was thinking about when I made the work.
Interesting. And I think the idea of coming face to face with different aspects of your identity, which I suppose is what I've taken from that sort of ending scene, is that actually some of that stuff you want to hide in terms of identity and kind of sharing who you are, some of that stuff you want to keep secret, and other stuff you perhaps want to broadcast. And it's all about context and who you're with and what you're doing. So that's kind of where I was thinking with that.
Great, yeah, I love that.
That's great. I guess I'd be interested to hear sort of both of your thoughts on this. I'm wondering, what sort of lessons do you think we can learn about sort of how we might make good digital identities from thinking about these ideas of sort of, fragments of selves sort of coalescing in the present?
Yeah. It's really interesting, right? It's the panopticon effect of the digital identity and the unavoidability and inescapability of the choices that you've made in the past, perhaps haunting you in the future. We also, the piece that I've made, I want to think about it as optimistic, but really we have seen in the past the presumption of what someone's future will be because of their present circumstances, and those are always negative, based in racism, based in gender bias, based in homophobia. So in actuality in the world, I'm not sure if we're nailing it yet, but I would like to sort of use this concept and the piece that I've made now in terms of what I will now continue to make, because you followed the thread, right? So I'm on a thread and I want to continue seeing what will the next piece be based off of like this initial kernel of an idea. And I would like to hypothesize it towards a digital good, towards a positive future. Like, what positive things can we take from these circumstances that we keep creating? You know, I'm in the Writers Guild of America West, and we were on strike for 8 months or something. I was on a picket line last year. By the end of it, mostly protesting AI. In the beginning, it wasn't so much about AI, but in those few months, it dramatically changed, right? Because that was the biggest threat of the moment, and still probably is. And I have a good friend who is a coder, and she just took a new job to work for, an AI-based company. And we had kind of an argument about it, pleasant, but sisterly argument. And she's like, I just don't understand why, you studied digital media. Like, you're a digital artist. Like, how can you think this is bad? She's like, I'm not even making content. I'm making the container for which other people can use to make content. I was like, well, you do see how that's worse, right? And I think our relationship to the digital arts also means like an interest in science fiction, which is how we sort of hypothesize the worst case scenario, usually, like a safe way to think about the worst case. So again, though, but this is why I was so drawn to the idea of this residency, because I want to think, if you're going to think about the worst, if you're going to spend your time catastrophizing, you should probably also give equal time to thinking about, well, what's the best thing that could happen? What's the most positive thing that can happen? And I'm really trying to live my life like that now. I don't know if that answered your question at all, Dan. It's 40 in the morning here in LA. I've been up many hours.
I think, and I mean, another thing that relates to that I took from it is this idea of, like, especially as it relates to AI, is that these sorts of predictive technologies are already happening. Like we see sort of predictive policing. We saw in the sort of UK school exams, there was like this sort of predicted marks, but a lot of these things you don't necessarily know as an individual how those decisions are being made. Like probably the coders also don't know how these things are being made. So it's not transparent, and so this idea of like making these things more transparent and being able to see your sort of past, present, almost like sort of Christmas Carol style, and be able to make interventions that maybe do that course correction is quite an interesting thing to think about.
Yeah, and I do love what Lisa was saying, because I do think that there is this loss of privacy. So you have these sort of alternate selves and alternate identities. Maybe you have a active, Reddit profile or something, and you also have like your family Facebook group, right? And then thinking about how perhaps we cannot really keep them separate, and those lines dissolve whether you like it or not. So your choices, therefore, you are confronted with the products of your choices, perhaps all of the time. And that's scary for most of us, I think. Not everyone. People love it. But a lot of people in LA who love it. But for me, it's quite an intimidating thing. And I try to keep as many facts off of my, internet life as possible. Throw in some fiction, throw them off the train. It's just, it feels a bit safer to muddy the waters in a way. And I can't say that that's even been conscious, but I'm aware that I do it. So, I don't know. It's a really interesting time to be alive and to be thinking things and making work, certainly.
Yeah, agree. Thank you so much, both of you, for that. It's super interesting. Love the video. I'm going to go back definitely and spend some more time with those different fragments as well, and really enjoyed it. So thank you very much. I'm going to move us and sort of think about the future now then. And I think, so one of the other interesting things we've been thinking about is how this stuff sort of plays out in the future. But not only like with if and when these technologies become sort of more mainstream and sort of adopted, but also with sort of additional AI fuel systems maybe tying into these things, and the potential for these sort of almost unknowable complexity, especially from the perspective of the individuals. This ideas of sort of the divine, the sort of machinic perspectives of aggregate identities, and sort of these new types of entanglements that they create. And for me, that's why I sort of started to take from Mac, your work, these ideas of like the divine, like almost like leading towards this sort of this faith, or like there's something there where we don't feel like we can control this. Super interesting. So I'd like to introduce, also invite Jen to sort of comment or sort of lead some of the questions around this.
Great, thank you. And thank you, Mac. It was really great to participate in the work that you gave us, particularly because part of that was for us to step away, and then for you to kind of show us our absence back through the computers. And it actually, in this conversation that we've just been having now, it started making me think about the relationships between omnipotence and an omnipresent sense of the divine, and the unknowableness of the divine, and how omnipotence and omnipresence sort of always being there, this constant presence that we think of in terms of AI, that we think of in terms of the internet, and online identity, and being unknowable. And I think the stepping away makes us unknowable as well. That we're taking our presence away from the systems that try to know us. And I thought this would be, it for me was fascinating to think about these relationships between ideas of the divine and ideas of the unknowable. And I think I was really taken by this idea of absence and presence, and possibly of a refusal, because I noticed that in for your Transmediale commission, you're talking about an abolition of the screen. And I think there's something about refusing, abolishing, stepping away. And I wondered if you could tell us a bit more about that, because that seems to be a really interesting relationship to something that's omnipresent and unknowable. How do you step away from something that's omnipotent?
Yeah. I mean, that's the project. Actually, the reason why, so that the project I did with Transmediale, Abolish the Screen, what I ended up sort of making was this sort of prayer manifesto that was just like a constant denial, actually, of how I would describe the screen, which is what Jonathan Beller calls like computational racial capital condition, where all of our ideas and discourses and expressivity sort of become coded into the machine. And so even the most, let's say, critical discourse becomes sort of like co-opted or subsumed into the machinic system. So this idea of the apophatic theology or negative sort of logic really appealed to me and was sort of a direction or departure from this abolish the screen idea, because I looked back at like, I simply could not find the answer actually. Like there's no answer how you could actually like abolish the screen, even in the terms of like, what it just made me is like look back at how like social media or like all of these communication technologies also just come back to the birth certificate, they come back to like the exchange of money, transactions. Digitality was already sort of like formed and embodied even before the smartphone, even before the computer. And the way that I would even like think about AI now, I'm more interested in like the labor, the automatic labor that sort of exploited subjects like virtual assistants in the Philippines, for example, do. So it's just an impossible answer. And so for me, this approach of like prayer and sort of like denial and a logics of negation was sort of the kind of dreaming that was left for me. Yeah, because I feel like the logic of computational is essentially like combining meaning and value, monetary value together. And I kind of didn't want to do that. I didn't want to affirm or make like positive gestures towards value, if that makes sense. It drives me crazy being interested in this topic.
The idea of not being able to that you can't refuse, that you can't, there's no disentangling from those systems, and it sort of reminds me of things from my area of mobility studies. What people say about the car, the car's so built into our architectures and way of living that even if you don't have a car, you're still within the systems that having cars have built, and so even if you try and step outside, that there is no refusal. I was also really interested in this idea of dialogue. So in your biog, it says, that part of what your practice is dialogue, and you were encouraging us to, in your work, to respond to these kind of prompts. and to think about prayer. And I was wondering whether you think of prayer as a kind of dialogue and what that changes about the dynamics of dialogue in thinking about identity.
Yeah, I mean, for me, this idea of prayer was, and I think I tried to say this in the work as well. Like, for me, prayer is sort of like a manifesto. Right now, obviously, like with regimes of, let's say, scientificity, we kind of are left with not much sort of approaches for dreaming. And for me, the prayer was a dialogue in a way that, you know, with oral tradition, obviously people's prayers sometimes change. People talk about what they hear and what they speak. And, you know, any manifesto actually doesn't necessarily desire a kind of permanence. They would always change as well, depending on the conditions of production or like the political conditions, whatever. And yeah, for me, this dialogue is important because it's also like a form of organizing, and it's a form of practice that is actually something that can be taken away from us in sort of like a completion or finality of this machinic system. You know, the discourse we produce becomes a machine that consumes us. Like, you know, when you read Kindle, it's Kindle that's reading us, actually, stuff like that. So how do we also, form dialogue or build dialogue that's like very also critical in its form to the sickness of the internet?
Great, yeah, it's fascinating work. I could ask you loads more questions, but I think we probably need to hand back to Dan and the rest of the discussion.
Thank you so much.
Great, thank you very much. Yeah, it's super interesting, and yeah, I feel like I could talk to all of you for a lot longer. But I feel like I should open the floor and see if anyone's got any questions they would like to ask. If you do, you can come to the stage where I am, and this will spotlight you, and you can ask a question. Or equally, maybe this is a space where we could have some cross-panel discussion, or maybe if someone would like to comment on someone else's work, there's space for that now. So if you are in the audience and would like to come and ask a question, please walk up to the front and you can stand on this platform. I appreciate that, how awkward this moment was going to be, like the waiting for. So if that doesn't happen, I guess one question I could ask of all of you is, you know, we've wanted to sort of run this residency as a way of sort of thinking of futures of digital identities, and I'm wondering whether you think, like, any sort of reflections for you on the residency as a whole, and what you think maybe art can sort of help us do in that regard that maybe other things can't do.
I think it's great just as a way of thinking about all of this. I think it's really creative, and it just sort of like, yeah, it just makes you think about things in a very different way. But Jeannie's work, I was thinking of last week. I think it's the CEO of the firm that runs Zoom was talking about creating a virtual version of you that goes into meetings and makes the decisions for you, so you don't have to go to the meetings. And there's always been a thing, hasn't there, this idea that with digital you could have more leisure time. But actually, I was beginning to think, after I read that, how many virtual versions of ourselves might there be doing all these things? You know what I mean? If a virtual version of yourself can be making decisions for you, there has to be this idea that it knows you, yourself, and the business and everything really well. You do have to question if there's a reason to even have you in the job then. But yeah, so I found that really interesting, that idea. You know, you're talking about that other virtual person. Yeah. But yeah, you brought it together because it was just something I was thinking about last week. So it was just, sorry, that's not a question. It's just a comment that it was great to hear you talking about that.
Thank you, Linda. I just also want to point out, like, you know, I just love that, like, we have social scientists here. We have people from different backgrounds. I'm around artists and filmmakers a lot, but it's just good to kind of talk, you know, outside of our own bubble. And I think a lot about how we use art to, you know, to think about and process difficult issues, but also moments of awe, moments of beauty. Like they're all so important. And, you know, when we talk about things that we've made as a culture in various times in the world, we talk about the art. You know, it matters a lot. So I just really appreciate that the time was taken and the care was taken in this residency to encourage that conversation. I just want to say thank you to everyone.
Thank you. It's something that within this sort of, you know, the sort of wider sort of digital good network, I'm very keen to be sort of advocating for creative methods. I think that in order to think about futures of digital goods, like we need creative sort of practitioners, but also researchers like thinking and pushing about these things. And I think that one of the difficulties with having this sort of work within sort of interdisciplinary projects is often the feeling that people don't get it. That, you know, they think that maybe it's fun and nice to have, but it's not doing sort of weighty sort of conceptual work. And I hope that today has made people realise that actually it can do that. Because for me, I've taken a lot from all of the different you know, works that you've done, and also that, you know, the work that sort of Kim has done in creating these different spaces and sort of bringing that together as well. So I've been, you know, really excited sort of working with you all on this. It's really been quite sort of enlightening and like just genuinely exciting. So thank you all for that. I guess maybe this is the time where I need to sort of wrap up then. I guess, so I think, so thank you to the artist. Yeah, it's been genuinely great to work with you all. Such a pleasure. I'm sure everyone else that I've talked to on the day has really enjoyed it as well. I'd like to thank the panellists, Linda, Jen and Lisa. Thank you so much for being part of the panel and asking such sort of good questions. It sort of made me feel a little bit embarrassed about how good the questions were that you asked, and I wish that I'd asked good questions like that. We've also got some people that aren't on the call but have been sort of instrumental in helping us do the stuff behind the scenes, which is Ruth and Nikki from the DGN. So if they watch this recording, thank you very much for your help with that. And I'd like to also thank EPSRC for funding this project. And for everyone else that's sort of been part of this today, sort of, you know, as part of the audience, the visitors, but also sort of participants in some of the exhibition pieces. So thank you so much. This exhibition will remain online as long as we possibly can. It will be on the DGN website, but feel free to, you know, spend some more time in the spaces. We've got these whiteboards. You know, if you do want to share some of your thoughts, one thing that I would really love to hear is some of your own sort of maybe metaphors for digital identities. Like, what are some good metaphors that we should be thinking about? Like digital identities as what? That's what I'm sort of thinking at the moment. So I'd really love to hear anything that you would like to share on that. Im, do you have any sort of final thoughts or things you want to say?
Yeah, I suppose I just kind of wanted to reiterate what you said and like thank everyone. Like, I feel like you probably say the same as me, that we didn't know what was going to happen when we went into this residency. There was a lot of unknowns, and Jeannie, Anshul, Mac, you've all made it like a really, really good residency, and it's been really rich work that's come from it. So yeah, just really appreciate all of the work that you put into it as well, and thank you. I'm not going to go through the thank yous again that Dan's gone through, but yeah, thank you to everyone else. Yeah, I think that's probably it from me. But yeah.